Those familiar with my work will recognize a recurring shape. I practice what is called evolutionary philosophy, or the conviction that what man ought to do is informed by what man is, and that what man is has been shaped by the evolutionary process. Some critics have accused me of determinism, claiming I deny humanity's capacity to adapt. But such accusations are often misrepresentations, or at least misunderstandings. To deny adaptability is to deny evolution itself. What kind of evolutionary philosopher would I be if I denied the adaptive nature of mankind? However, adaptation has limits. Like all life forms, humans can only adapt at a certain pace and under certain conditions. Our current condition is a world that moves at a revolutionary speed, altering human life all the way from its superficial aspects down to its very foundations. And this pace of change threatens to outstrip the natural mechanisms of adaptation, particularly those in the social and psychological domains. Few people today deny the concept of lagging adaptation as it pertains to the physical body. Screen time gives us tech neck, excess driving, lumbar pain, and factory farming and unhealthy gut. We are so quick to accept concepts and deny their obvious conclusions. What many fail to grasp is that our minds too are suffering. Less visible, but perhaps even more excruciating maladaptions. I explored one such psychological maladaption in my earlier piece titled Feminism and the Rise of the School Shooter. Now I turn to another in Relational Identity and the Modern Crisis of the Self. Chapter 1. Human Identity Through History, a Relational Foundation. In his posthumously published Mind, Self, and Society, American psychologist George Herbert Mead coined the term symbolic interactionism, arguing that a sense of self is formed through social interaction. His school of psychology is but a scientific exploration of something that deep thinkers have known about our nature since the beginning of philosophy. Aristotle said it in 305 BC. Man is by nature a political animal. Throughout history, humans have primarily understood themselves through their relationships, their family, their kin, and their community. Before the technological age, identity was rarely uncertain. A person saw himself as a son, a brother, a member of a village, a servant of a god, citizen of a land. Names themselves often denote such relationship. Johnson, or son of John, McLaren, son of Lawrence, etc. Later, as industrial society reshaped the world, identities became tethered to one's occupation: potter, spicer, smith, etc. Whether familial, geographic, or vocational, identity was always relational. In a civilization constructed of smaller, tightly knit communities, to say where you were from was to say who you were from. A village, a clan, a dialect. Together they revealed a shared history and the human character it gave birth to. People, like other social animals, build their sense of self not in isolation, but through the eyes and minds of their relations. This collective way of forming identity has been severed by the forces of modernity. Chapter 2. The Collapse of Relational Structures. As the institutions of family, friendship, and local community have eroded, the ability of people to construct stable identities has entered a state of arrested development. From this disruption is born a phenomena which would have been incomprehensible to our ancestors: identity crisis. The American nuclear family, already a diluted form of extended kinship, was for a time able to serve as a central structure around which professional life, church, and local ties were stitched together into a patchwork identity. Fast forward to today, and for most families and communities, this patchwork has neared the end of its total deconstruction. Birth rates have collapsed, families are smaller and more scattered, the community is fragmented by migration and transience. Even occupations, once a pillar of identity, are threatened by remote work, automation, and artificial intelligence. The American person's identity was always fragile, and some of our most iconic film and literature testify to this theme. But that existential instability has now trickled down from the philosophers and poets to the ordinary people everywhere. Nihilism grips all, and the pain of isolation proliferates through society, now rearing its head in grotesque and unexpected ways. This is the modern predicament, but I feel no need to detail the entire source, as it has been thoroughly explored in works like Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, and with Emile Durkheim's concept of anomie. I also feel quite secure in assuming that you, the reader, have felt loneliness. If you are alive today, you likely know what it means to feel persistently, inexplicably alone, even while surrounded by others. It is an epidemic, as they say. What once gave us a sense of self is absent from life. The signals from our past and our people are now faint, a faded photograph. If it is agreed that humans have historically formed identity through relation to their community, then we must ask, what happens when we're alone? Chapter 3: Psychological Consequences. When an animal is forced to live in contradiction to its nature, the resulting experience is depression. Mankind, surrounded by artifice, becomes like a caged tiger at a zoo, lying about all day, never showing signs of his notorious nature. Identity crisis is therefore not just a philosophical concern, but a biological and emotional condition, expressed most commonly as chronic sadness. The so-called First World has run the largest psychological experiment in history to accidentally prove that loneliness can poison the richest man, just as love and connection can heal the poor. A question has therefore come to the forefront of the current zeitgeist. If we are so rich, why are we so unhappy? Some will no doubt object to the implication of the question. How could people in the past be happy? What with syphilis and food insecurity and war? Who could be happy with such struggle? This response to the nostalgic attitudes of the youth is firmly planted in the boomer American consciousness. Perhaps it's the nature of every empire at its zenith never to entertain the superior nature of any other society. However, younger generations who have experienced this dislocation most poignantly have begun to take on many paleo attitudes, questioning the technological and social developments of the last 200 years. Elder doubt about the possibility of ancient happiness betrays a deeper belief that ease and abundance are the true currencies of joy. But to those of us who examine the nature of well-being, it is evident that happiness springs not from luxury, but from vitality, meaning, and the closeness of communal life. Consider a comparison: the Gen Alpha teen scrolling a phone alone in his bedroom versus their World War II era great-grandfather, who, despite serious hardships, loved and was loved by dozens. Whose existence is preferred? Scientific research supports what we already instinctively know. Well-being is not correlated with the number of people you know, but the number of people you truly trust. Absent these deeper bonds, the nervous system perceives danger and responds with anxiety. Happiness and unhappiness are therefore not merely moods. It's not so purely emotional as that. Unhappiness can be logical. Emotions are often logical responses to the perceived security of one's social condition. Isolated animals in captivity consistently show signs of depression, even when their physical needs are met. This is the nature of humanity's modern predicament. Chapter 4. Surrogate Identities. Modernity's Hollow Substitute. In the vacuum left by broken kinship, modern people do not stop seeking identity. They simply begin to grasp at whatever the world affords. With families deconstructing and communities dissolving, people turn to surrogate identities. Sports teams, political movements, professional labels, and niche hobbies. These attachments mimic the role that blood and land once played, but without the same existential reality. They are all, in their own ways, fantasies. These associations have always existed, but never before with this intensity. Now, fandom fills the space once occupied by kinship. Flags, chants, obsessions, and rivalries become frivolous rituals. The same can be said for bands, jobs, ideologies, even friendships. Shallow and unstable though they may be, these surrogate identifications are the only clay with which man has to construct a self, and so he tries his best. But surrogate identities are fundamentally different from those that are inherent. Most importantly, they say nothing intrinsic of a person's core self. A fan of a team or a practitioner of a hobby can come in infinite shades of character. These attachments lack the relational gravity that once tethered people to their lineage and to their communities. Modern optimists would argue that civic values or pluralism itself can provide a shared identity. But such values, while useful for governance, are too thin to satisfy the human thirst for depth and belonging. They may offer structure, but could never offer home. Thus, we live in a stunning paradox, surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. I would like to pause here. My aim with this paper is not merely to decry this dilemma, or to retreat into an impotent and defeated conservatism. Instead, we must seek to understand how humanity can survive the age of technology. What does it mean to live a good life in an era defined by disconnection? How can we repair man's broken bonds without condemning him to a life of roleplay and recursive fantasy? Chapter 5. A True Identity. The modern world often destroys something vital, then replaces it with something luxurious. But luxury cannot replace the meaning we have lost with our blood and land. But these ancient realities are no longer on offer to us. Therefore, what would constitute a success or failure to rebuild relational identity in the modern world? Failure would be the simulation of community, another surrogate activity, a Zoom call from which no lasting identity can be formed. What would success look like? The total replacement of the support and connection once provided through blood and land. The result of this would be the resurrection of a stable and dependable self-identity. Modern man has no choice but to rebuild his connection using the tools that are at his disposal. Online communities have succeeded and failed at this to varying degrees. It is true that the digital revolution has a lot to do with the dislocation that has been previously discussed. However, in a twist of irony, that which had the power to destroy our world might now be the only ex machina powerful enough for its salvation. So how can community be achieved through digital means? To answer this question, we have to ask, what did communities built of blood and land achieve? It is inconvenient to a liberal society, though nonetheless true, that human beings prefer to associate with those who are familiar. For a long time, America could overlook skin-deep differences and lean on a values-based identity. But communal identity between those who share neither values or political ideals? Impossible. It turns out that the conclusion of our modern experiment is an exaltation of ancient claims about human nature, that man is a political, sometimes translated as social, animal, and that what man holds closest to his heart are his ethics, his sense of justice, and his metaphysical understandings. Therefore, living life among those who hold similar values enables a person to let their guard down, to speak and act without disguise, thus allowing their identity to emerge more clearly through the shaping force of relational belonging. Individualism often struggles to account for the human yearning for familiarity and understanding. This individualism cries out, "But both good and bad men exist within all creeds," which is true, but which merely points towards an unnatural ideal, and does not wrestle with the fact of our humanity. Therefore, whatever replacement of community is to be successful must accept man on his own terms. It must wrestle with his nature forthrightly, and must replace the understanding commonly inherited in landed and ethnocentric communities. Those features of landed and ethnocentric cultures are such: shared language, shared metaphysics, views of God, universal reality, shared beliefs in the role of man on earth, shared notions of what constitutes a good life, shared sense of justice and punishment for transgression against the good, shared historical narrative, shared aesthetic tendencies of culture and art, and a shared understanding of who is and who is not a member of the community. This is obviously a tall order to achieve in our fragmented and individualized nation. Certainly, it is true that no community, historical or modern, is capable or, in fact, is desired to create a conformity across all of these features and across all members of society. However, if these boundaries strike us as far too narrow, that is less an indictment of the boundaries than a proof of the profound dissociation in modernity. Most of these understandings were shared among the majority of people in nearly all nations in history. Not long ago, a supermajority of Americans shared these values as well. All of these cultural features play pivotal roles in how a person understands themselves. Thus, they are psychologically central to the process of identity formation. In seeing these features reflected back to him in the eyes of his community, man begins to see himself. How then can a digital community develop this reflection today? It must replace what was once provided, but has hence been lost. Shared language. Fortunately, this develops organically in online spaces. A base language is needed, of course. For most who reside in America, English will do. And like dialects before, memes and linguistic signifiers of group identity will be the result of dialogue in the digital space. Shared language is therefore the easiest of all cultural features to replace. Shared metaphysics, shared God. This is perhaps the most difficult part of a man's identity to take from him, and to the extent that it has been distorted, it is the most arduous to replace. Different online communities will start from a place of belief or non-belief, and this is where the process of solidification will begin. Some communities will start from a Nietzschean understanding of the overman, with his task to create new values for a new age. Whether these new values can coalesce into something coherent enough to worship is yet to be determined. Other communities will start from the point of Scripture will find a recommitment to God as he has been previously understood in gospel. The extent to which this metaphysics looks similar or different to the old church will be determined by the interplay between the community and its priests. Textual arguments and historical necessity will result in a coalescence of shared faith over time, as it has always done. Shared belief in the role of man on earth and what constitutes a good life. Of central psychological importance and often following from metaphysics is the question of what end a community serves. What kind of life are we laboring day by day to build for ourselves and for each other? In the modern world, the proliferation of lifestyles has eroded a shared vision of human purpose. Once unifying sentiments such as we just want to provide for our families among the working class, or we just want to pursue truth among academics, can no longer be taken for granted. A new digital community will invariably begin to coalesce around shared values. Different communities with their shared metaphysics and values will naturally tend towards certain behaviors and desire certain outcomes. Man will once again become self-conscious of the way he acts and what ends he acts in service of. Through this utility, he will begin to rehabilitate an understanding of his purpose on earth. Shared sense of justice. It is often in the tumult of crisis and threat where the bonds of community are tested. The late stage of social breakdown is where people of close proximity do not agree on what is justice. Justice is the tip of the spear, behind which lies all values and metaphysical understandings. When all that is believed and held sacred is transgressed upon, man's convictions are put to the ultimate test. In some lands today, crime is met with harsh punishment. In other lands, it is hardly met with condemnation. Worst of all, when questions of who commits the crime determines what the punishment ought be, the community is no longer whole, and the boundaries of a people are made definitive. Communities are those people who see themselves living equally beneath the same justice. Without this certainty, man becomes paralyzed to act when confronted by evil. Justice is the hand of God which gives him strength, but which God? A shared history. In this era, we must settle for a shared conception of history, as a shared ethnicity is no longer possible. Much of the political strife we experience today is the result of competing historical narratives. Questions of morality that are applied to our civilization's past and the dispensation to label all things either good or evil has resulted in a polarization of views on our past, and thus the status of our own souls having sprouted from such soil. As we see our politics continue to bifurcate along lines of criticism versus patriotism, it is revealed how the nature of man's historical narrative flavors everything he sees about the world. It determines the past, the present, and therefore how man understands his own trajectory. There will always be room in any community for petty squabbles between historians on the salience of this or that fact. But whether a man's entire civilization, his people, is to be damned or blessed, is of vital importance. This reality is why we see understandings of history playing a central part in the competing narratives of our current conflict. A shared art. The tendency for cultures to adopt distinct artistic styles is as old as humanity itself. It's this behavior that aids archaeologists in distinguishing between different peoples in prehistoric contexts. The same dynamic where like-minded individuals gravitate towards a shared aesthetic still plays out today among the modern ideological factions. We see it pronounced in recent internet trends with the various strains of right-wing philosophy. Trad, Kino, and return aesthetics all evoke the specific values and attitudes inherent to those movements. In contrast, left-wing aesthetics tend to reflect nearly the opposite set of ideals. These communal arts, much like language, arise organically from a shared proximity. They function as signals of affiliation, both consciously through uniform and symbolism, and unconsciously through choices in dress and bodily presentation. They may appear in a person's conscious mind as choices that are purely personal, but they are in fact shaped by collective identity. Who is and who is not a member of the community? Inclusivity is a sacred value of modernity, yet even as this ideal marched through our institutions, the very progressives who were its champions could not help but define themselves in opposition to someone. In a completely accidental way, this movement has illustrated the role that exclusion plays in the development of communal cohesion. The wedding of inclusive moral philosophy with post-colonial philosophy, which has become anti-white, anti-male, and anti-Western in practice, is proof that every value structure finds itself a mark with which to contend and a group with which to exclude. In the case of progressive elites, the white man becomes the sinner, the undesirable and irredeemable figure with whom they are not, and therefore are together in opposition. If even a movement which sees itself to be built upon the value of inclusivity must exclude in order to coalesce, then progressives have done man's bank of knowledge a great service. They have provided us the greatest education on the boundaries of man's being, as can only be done in the most extreme of societies. Let me be clear, hatred is not a requirement for coalescence, but full-throated declaration of who a group is, the nature of their community and their cause for living, naturally brings about distinction. It allows not only for a person to see himself and grow in love for himself, but also to see clearer those who are not like himself. Then he grows naturally out of love for himself and his community to reject all that might seek to contaminate his precious self-understanding. Cancel culture sprang from the left out of fear that reactionary conservatives would contaminate their community and challenge them to question their sacred principles. This, after all, was a rational understanding. Has there ever been an inclusive community which did not result in alienation? If you search the annals of history, you would never find it. It is a contradiction in terms. To be or not to be, they are one and the same. To draw a distinction in who one is to draw a distinction in what and therefore who one is not. Certainly, modernity proves that you can broaden this distinction. You can broaden it ad infinitum. You can broaden it until man ceases to exist. Then you would be left with the current state of things. We have returned to the beginning, to the current state of things, where we are greeted by a choice to accept that we are content with the current alienation or to challenge the presuppositions that led us here. This is a choice that every person must make for himself. The purpose of this essay is not to make that choice for anyone, but rather to describe the contours of the modern predicament and its potential solution. Regardless of what choice any individual or community makes, suffering will surely result, but perhaps one day man will live again as himself. He has only to decide to lose his notions or to lose himself and continue to live lost as he has for the past 100 years. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you liked this essay and you would like to support this channel, please like and subscribe, and send me a message if you found this interesting and you want to continue the discussion.